RT340, Corporate Practices for Productivity Improvement. Which practices can be implemented at the corporate level to improve productivity? Learn how to implement key practices to improve the financial future of your organization. Here to present their findings are Juan Gomez-Tagle, AZCO Inc., Angela Johnson, DTE Energy, Ilya Tulumak, Day & Zimmerman, Carlos Caldas, University of Texas at Austin. And from Bechtel, your moderator, Doug Omachinsky.
There are many factors that contribute at not just the project level, the enterprise level, to improving productivity. So, as simply illustrated by the iceberg, there's the visible and obvious productivity challenge that we have. So if you're out on a project and you're observing some unproductive work, I know these are productivity challenges we have to deal with. But then there's the larger portion of the iceberg, the hidden, the not so obvious productivity issues that we have to deal with. These are the activities that provide the planning, the leadership, the material, the technical information that's required at the job site to keep our crews working. These are activities that originate during the planning, the design, the procurement stages of the project, but also stem from whether or not there's a corporate focus on improving productivity. So how is our corporate focus? As CI members, we're well aware of the extensive research that's available to us through CI best practices, through CI research. A lot of this research, a lot of these best practices were developed to improve project execution and in some cases improve productivity. But a survey done by RT340 shows that companies are very inconsistent when using these best practices. Now, these are best practices and research that have data to support that when implemented will improve project execution. So why don't we use them? So while you're thinking about that, let's go back to the concept of the video. So what does it mean to simply not be able to complete work? And in this case, a work package. And it's worth noting that the three biggest causes of not being able to complete work per CII is missing technical information, missing material, whether that be for permanent plant or indirect, and then change. Change in execution, change in technical specification. So what are the effects of that? Well, as we saw in the video, we're continually moving our craft to contingent work. This will lower the morale within the crews. You're going to see a drop in productivity within those crews and throughout the project. You're going to start to see an accumulation of incomplete work. So your punch list is going to continue to grow. You're going to have quality issues because you're continually revisiting that rework. Your direct hours are going to go up. Your direct costs are going to go up, followed by your indirect hours and your indirect costs going up. All of this with the cost and the pressure to finish the project on time. So then at the end, you're trying to avoid this cost schedule tsunami. So what does this all mean in terms of the project? Well, of course, you multiply this by the thousands of times that it occurs on a project, and it's going to drive the cost of the project up. But what's the magnitude of that? What is the actual cost in the industry because of this? Well, a report released by McKinsey in 2017 showed that estimates losses between $1.6 and $2.3 trillion, that's trillion with a T, due to productivity loss in the capital construction industry and the global capital construction industry. So think of how many projects we're not executing because of productivity loss. The construction productivity research program was a 5-phase, multi-year effort that was developed by RT252 and concluded in around 2014. This was a research program that focused on productivity improvement at the project execution level, but also looked at productivity improvement at the trade and craft level. The team summed up how to improve productivity very simply and to the point. There is no magic bullet. There has to be innovation to affect change. There must be improvements in process and technology. But most importantly, there must be improvements in practice. Improvements in practice must be driven from the corporate and executive leadership of both the owners and the contractors. There must be corporate-led productivity programs that not only focus on improving productivity at the project level, but also change the focus of productivity within the enterprise. But corporate leadership must first understand the components and framework of a constructability program. And most importantly, they must understand the barriers that they're going to have to remove to be able to implement a program at the enterprise level. So how do we do that? Well, Juan is going to start our research journey for you.
Thank you, Doug. Hello. Construction productivity improvement has been the focus of industry and academia for many years. There's extensive research associated with these productivity practices that have demonstrated improvement at both activity and trade levels. Practices like rework reduction, activity analysis, advanced work packaging, material controls like the video show. Now, these practices demonstrate improvement on their own. However, if we were to think about them collectively, they haven't been implemented very successfully. And sadly, as we look at statistics, productivity has stayed flat. So we asked ourselves, why? Why is implementation of these proven productivity practices not consistent across projects and organizations? And more importantly, what can we do to improve that implementation? We began our journey to answer those questions by reviewing previous research associated with productivity improvement. We also looked at best practices and also some very successful programs under the CII portfolio. And in doing so, we kept coming back to one program in particular: safety, and more specifically, safety KPIs. You see, for a while there, we even began to think that we should develop our own set of KPIs that would help us standardize productivity measuring. That's right, we thought we could find that magic bullet to improve productivity. However, we quickly realized that safety success is not really on the metrics and measures themselves. These are simply the result of a successful or unsuccessful program. Now, don't get me wrong, safety KPIs are essential to a safety program. However, it was the management of the program that became of interest to us. You see, in regards to safety, industry-wide improvement has been demonstrated for decades. And a cornerstone of that improvement has been corporate engagement and commitment through formal safety programs. Safety has been able to do what productivity hasn't. It has been able to manage all these practices under one umbrella collectively as a program. Therefore, at the beginning of our journey, safety program became the framework and guideline for us to conduct our study. To further demonstrate that, now we enter that interactive portion of the presentation. So please, we'll go back. There we go. Take out your cell phone. If you haven't done so, click on the research team under the schedule, under our session. Towards the bottom of it, there should be 2 questions. Please don't answer them yet. I like to frame the questions before you do. So here's what I want you to think. Even though it's a quick yes or no answer, I do want you to think about how it applies to your organization as a whole. I want you to think how it applies to small projects to large projects, from a satellite office to the mothership. I want you to think, how is training from the craft to senior executive? How about meetings and so forth? How does this question apply to your complete organization? Here we go. Question number 1. Does your company effectively implement corporate-level best practices to improve safety performance across your project portfolio? Again, I want you to think about leadership involvement. What kind of safety committees do you have? How about training? How about meeting talks before any meeting? How about a safety talk and so forth? Well, I'll give a few seconds for everybody. All right, let's take a look at the answer. What did we get? 91%. Is anybody surprised? I'm certainly not. You see, organizations like ours have implemented safety programs, and we have systematically improved the safety performance of our organizations and at the same time the industry. I'm a little surprised. I was hoping to be 100%, but that's okay. If you're not there, you're in a good company. There's plenty of people here that can help you in your journey to improving safety at your organization. Okay, so now to the second question, and I want you to think about it the same way as safety. How did it apply, right? So question number 2. Does your company effectively implement corporate-level best practices to improve productivity performance across your project portfolio? So just like safety, do you have productivity minute before a meeting? How about KPIs for productivity? Do they get distributed upstream and downstream across the organization? How about training? Is it the same training for productivity at the craft and the senior leadership? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. All right, the answer showed up over there. So anybody surprised with that? I'm certainly not. It's sad, but we're not surprised. This is conclusive with the research. See, productivity practices are not being managed at the corporate level. So when we look at the actual resource from our corporate research, we have these graphs. On the right side, we see safety program utilization. As a program, we're at 88% utilization. 88%, that's pretty much the same number that we got here. We're talking culture, right? Certainly some of us, some of our organizations, we don't even talk about it as a program. It is part of our culture. We're determined to get to 0. I know at AZCO we're not there yet, but we're going to be there. We're very close. And I bet you if I ask any one of you guys to come up here, you will be passionate and talk about your safety programs. But when we look at the left side, let's look at productivity. Rework reduction, 20% utilization. Now remember, like Doug mentioned, these are practices that have proven complete success. When we look at activity analysis, 22%. Material management, like the little video we had at the beginning, 50% utilization. This is far from culture level. So our research is conclusive. Productivity practices are not being managed through corporate level programs. In other words, and this may sting a little, corporate leadership does not take ownership of productivity improvement like they do with safety. Okay, now that we reviewed how safety became the guideline to our research, let's talk about the research journey itself. Now remember, I'm summarizing 2 years of research into one slide, so it's going to be a little quick. For the full review and for full details, please, we encourage you to read our research report. You'll find everything about this research. So we began with a series of surveys that helped us evaluate the maturity level of productivity programs as they compared to safety programs. We gathered those findings, and after that, we started honing in on companies, and we did other surveys that helped us identify what best practices work for certain programs and what things didn't work for those programs. We followed that up with phone interviews with subject matter experts, and we got conclusive evidence about what kind of barriers you're going to encounter when you put a productivity improvement program. At the end of our journey, we came up with 94 corporate best practices, 94. We grouped those into 6 key elements, categories, so to speak. Angela will talk about those here shortly. But we grouped those into 6 categories. And at the end, understanding the complexity of this research, we developed an implementation framework that you can utilize right now to evaluate the state of maturity of your organization, and that it can guide you in implementing a successful program. Last, we wanted to test our findings, so we conducted 2 case studies, one at a large owner organization and another one at a large general contractor, both CII members. So in summary, our journey through extensive research, analysis, interviews, we were able to find 94 corporate actions that are instrumental to the success of a productivity improvement program. We grouped those into 6 categories. 6 key elements. Last but not least, we demonstrated the importance corporate engagement plays in the success of your program. You are the cornerstone of any program, especially productivity. Now that we discussed the journey, Angela will further discuss with you the detailed findings of our research.
All right, thanks, Juan. Good morning, everyone. I get the pleasure of sharing with you our key findings and more information on our 94 key actions and corporate actions. So one of the things we want to make note of, the things that you see here in bold are the things I'm going to highlight. There's no way in the time that we have that we'll be able to go through all 94 of our corporate actions. But we did want to highlight that some of these that we thought would be of interest to you. One of the things I want to make sure that you are aware of is that in our research, we did find that we do have all the tools and equipment we need to do our job. However, one of the things that we did find out is that we do not consistently or effectively do our leadership tasks. We don't necessarily have the right resources. We don't necessarily have the right structure and communications for our organizations. We're not necessarily consistent in our planning for productivity, as well as monitoring and controlling it, and last but not least, being consistent in our continuous improvement efforts. Another key finding here is that, as was stated earlier today and even yesterday, our industry in construction has been very stagnant in productivity. And one of the things that we found out is that we really don't have a roadmap or some type of way to determine how do we get to where it is that we're trying to go. So one of the things that we found out is that we need a roadmap. We need a framework to be able to explain how do you get from A to Z consistently. So that's where our 6 key elements came into play. We look at leadership, resources, structure and communications, planning for productivity, as well as monitoring and controlling it, and then continually improving it along the way. Some of the direction that we need was mentioned by Juan. We had the comparison between safety and productivity. So ask yourself, do you have a champion to influence your productivity program? We talked about influence a little bit yesterday, so think about that nudging. Do you have anybody in your organization that will give you that nudge to actively and proactively improve your productivity? The first element that I would like to talk about is leadership. There are 15 corporate actions within the leadership key element. In everything we do, we know that leadership sets the tone. In order to facilitate a culture that will improve productivity, we want to make sure that we have clearly defined our productivity metrics. Metrics is something that's near and dear to my heart, as my team has found out over the last 2 years. When we start talking about metrics, I go in real hard, and they're like, hold up, we get it. But when you think about metrics, how many of your metrics are majority green? Make you feel good, it's green, the metric's green. That may mean you don't have the right metric. So when you're trying to improve your productivity, you may want to ask your client what's important to them. Those are the things that we need to measure. We also need to set productivity goals. We want to make sure that everybody knows where they stand in alignment with everything that we're trying to do. So as leaders, have we established the correct productivity goals? We have to define what good looks like in everything that we do. Leadership must establish the vision through setting metrics and goals to help create the expectations that are needed to set the culture that we need within our organizations to improve productivity as we have done with safety. In addition, leadership needs to provide the resources to support the project implementation for the productivity practices that we have that have been provided to us through our CII research teams. The next element is resources. There are 16 corporate actions within the resource element. I will highlight a few of them. Not only must leadership provide the resources, they need to allocate the time for the dedicated resources to perform the duties that are being asked of them. So how do you know how much time that's going to be needed for these resources? I'm so glad you asked me that question. You might need to do a time study or two. I know people do not like being watched with a time clock or a clipboard, but sometimes it's necessary so that we know what we need to do to allocate the right time and the right resources at the right place. Secondly, we must hold corporate personnel accountable for their roles in terms of productivity goals and practices. How do we know that we have established the right goals? I'm glad you asked that as well. You may need to do it the same thing we did for safety. Ask yourself, how can I ensure that everyone from the C-suite to the street where the work is being performed has skin in the game? We must make sure that everybody is accountable for their role in terms of productivity. Thirdly, we must provide the right technology. We have talked a lot about technology this morning and even yesterday. Do we have the right technological tools to do what we need to do? Are we using an abacus when we could be using our mobile apps, as you guys demonstrated in our poll earlier today, where we could get data real time? So we really need to assess, are we really using the right tools to be able to be as productive as we can be? The main takeaway that I have for you here is when it comes to resources, we must assign someone or a team of people to be responsible, to hold people accountable. In addition, giving them the right duties and responsibility and the time that's required to run our productivity programs and the best practices that we have all researched and seen in our CII database. We know that if everyone is responsible, we will get exactly what we see on this slide right here. Has anybody seen the not me syndrome? They did it, she did it, he did it, it's not my fault. That's what we want to avoid. We want to make sure that everybody knows where they're supposed to play in this game. The next element is structure and communication. There are 14 corporate actions within this element. These corporate actions helps us to take a look at our organization. Are we structured in a manner where we can share information across and within and even outside of our line of sight in our construction world? Are we sharing information with the next level up or the next level down, or even with our suppliers and vendors that are helping us do our work? We need to make sure that we have the right structure in place and the right communications. We need to make sure the communication roles and responsibilities are clearly defined so that our productivity practices can be shared and information can be provided in a clear manner. We also must provide corporate personnel to support the project teams in the implementation of their productivity. Some people use a RACI chart, some people use communication plans, so there are plenty of tools to make sure this gets done. We just have to make sure that we're using them consistently. That seems like a lot. We're only halfway through the 6 elements, so take a deep breath. We're on our way, but there's a lot that we can do here on this journey. The next element is planning for productivity. There are 21 corporate actions when it comes to planning for productivity. We need to plan in advance the specific activities that need to be completed. As we know, when we start thinking about productivity when we're on the construction site, it's too late. We need to start thinking about productivity way before we get to the construction site and the implementation phase. The questions we want you to consider is, have you documented your key processes and procedures for your productivity practices? Do people know where to go if they don't have the information that they need available readily? We want to ensure that our front-end planning and engineering and procurement activities are considered prior to us getting to the construction site. So have you heard of Design for Six Sigma? This is where you design your processes so that you achieve 0 defects. Same concept. We want us to design our construction site projects in advance so that we do not have to stop and wait for the materials, as was shown in the dramatization video that we showed earlier. To facilitate a productive culture, we must plan for productivity by having and following our documentation, teaching our team members not to hesitate to raise problems sooner than later. The next element is productivity monitoring and control. Here we have 17 corporate actions. To have a successful corporate level productivity program, There must be a system in place to be able to actively control and monitor our productivity. We should be establishing productivity performance indicators. We should have some type of dashboard or balanced scorecard that's being monitored at a corporate level, not just at the job site. Everything that we do should be aligned from the top all the way to the job site. We want to be able to track our key productivity performance indicators throughout the project lifecycle. We must expect projects to make craft productivity, planning, and execution information readily available. Last but not least, our final key element is continuous improvement. Here, there are 11 corporate actions within this key element. This is where we improve everything that we talked about previously. Continuous improvement is dependent upon the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle for the entire program. We want to collect and analyze our productivity metrics for future planning and improvement, highlight and distribute those productivity performance data throughout the company and with our business partners so that we can continually improve our operations and our projects. In concept, you may be asking, does a better program actually demonstrate a relationship with an increased use of the productivity practices? We wanted to test our hypothesis here where it stated there is a significant increase in the use of proven productivity practices when organizations effectively implement actions across these 6 elements. We tested it with our case studies and our surveys, and the conclusions are solid. We can infer that implementation of the 94 corporate actions and within these 6 elements do indeed relate to better productivity. Now, Ilya will discuss how our findings can be implemented.
Thank you, Angela. So for those of you that are asking yourself the question, well, how can I utilize this research? What is the implementation framework? Well, we're here. I'm going to walk us through the implementation framework and help you get started on your journey to corporate productivity improvement. But I must say, this isn't for the faint of heart. This isn't going to be easy. This is a corporate level program with a big P, not a little program, not a little activity. Because if you want something easy to do, play checkers. All right, implementation framework. First phase is assess. One definition of leadership is understanding reality as it is. And so our first phase in the implementation framework is assessing your corporate maturity of your program. As was stated, there are 6 elements of a program. And so as you assess your program using the tools that are in our research, you will assess the maturity of each of the elements at the element level. And so within our research, what you see here is our findings of those that we have researched, the maturity level of the various programs from initial to optimized and everything in between. As you can see, understanding that variation, and there's a pretty significant variation where some elements may be at initial stages of maturity, while others may be at optimized or mature. This will give you an opportunity to really see reality as it is, where you are, where you need to focus, and then understand what the barriers are to improve. The second step is to identify. Identify your strengths, weaknesses, and misalignments. Our research, as stated by Angela, has indicated that there are 94 actions that you ought to be doing at a corporate level. And understanding where you're strong, where you are weak, will help you understand your current state. Once again, knowing whether you have a bunch of misaligned, ad hoc, disparate actions that are happening at a project level and haphazard, or are they aligned in a way that really drives enterprise-wide, portfolio-wide productivity improvement. The third phase is recognize. Recognizing the barriers within your corporate productivity program. Our research has found and identified 60 barriers. Barriers spanning from vertical to horizontal integration, collaboration, all sorts of things that really prevent these corporate best practices from being implemented at an enterprise level. And our fourth phase within the implementation framework is implement. This is where the team that is empowered to identify and put together a plan, an improvement plan for where you ought to go. And we put the change equation within this phase to really use the body of knowledge of change management, to really help us zone in on the fact that this process will help you create a high level of dissatisfaction, understand the dissatisfaction within your organization. Where are you weak? That should help you understand your dissatisfaction with your current state. These actions will also help you understand the V part of the change equation, the vision. Understanding what is at the heart at these actions will help you understand where you ought to be or where you could be. And that's for you to determine where is it that you want to take your organization and create that vision. And thirdly, the third variable of the change equation is the first steps, the process. What is the process that you're going to take to implement this corporate productivity program? The sum of those three variables have to outweigh the resistance of implementing a program like this. And that's why we keep saying senior level engagement and commitment is so essential to collectively overcome the resistance that's inherent in our organizations from implementing a program of this scale. And so in leading this program implementation, our research findings are there for you. They're available. They can be utilized coming out of this conference today. But we have to continue to stress this fact. It requires senior level executive engagement and commitment. Without that, you will not get the results you want. So I want you to think about something here. We talked about change yesterday. There was a speaker that talked about change and said change is ... Well, our team likes to say change, in this case, is going to be hard, but it will be worth it. The journey, the climb, the view is worth the climb. We say that you as an organization need to employ your organization's change management process, whatever that is. And so to illustrate the point, I'd like for you to think about a change effort in your career that was a disaster. I apologize for having you to imagine backwards. I know the theme is imagining forward, but imagine backwards with me for a minute. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about this change effort that was a complete failure. It may have been a change effort that you led, that you were a part of, or that you possibly even resisted. So as these horror stories and these memories come back to the surface, don't worry, I won't ask you to share your war stories. But in your example, in your experience, was it a failure because senior leadership didn't create a sense of urgency? Was it a failure because senior leadership didn't create the right guiding coalition to lead the change effort? Was it a failure because senior leadership didn't establish a vision of what the future could look like? Or maybe they didn't communicate it enough. Or how about the barriers to overcome? Did senior leadership take those barriers down, or they thought the project team was capable of doing it on their own? Did they declare victory too soon? And finally, did they fail to anchor that change into the culture to sustain that change effort moving forward? You see, these are the 8 fatal flaws that John Cotter, in his seminal work of Leading Change, indicated that organizations typically make, and change efforts fail from go. And it all hinges on senior leadership setting this up. And so we make the plea, our implementation framework will help you create an understanding of your current state. It will give you what you need to build up the dissatisfaction with the status quo, build the vision of where you could go with real practical tools that are within the knowledge base of CII, and put together a process that's unique to your context and your organization at whatever enterprise level that is to implement the changes. One final note on the implementation framework. The implementation framework went through a case study. We engaged a contractor and an owner. We implemented it within both organizations as a pilot. We took those learnings, took those findings, refined it, and I suspect we will continue to refine it because your individual context and each organizational context that's unique will continue to make the implementation framework stronger. But the starting point is there for us to use. Now I would like to ask Doug to close out our presentation and really call us to action.
Thanks, Elia. So let's step back to the safety productivity analogy for just a minute. When the San Francisco to Oakland Bay Bridge was originally built in the 1930s, 24 workers died during the construction of the bridge. But the project was still deemed a safety success. So safety statistics, historical data at the time for similar projects would suggest that 33 workers could possibly die. So safety, through the determination of owner and contractor leadership, has been driven to a point where a first aid case is unacceptable, and that the safety of our workers is of the greatest value. But if you look at productivity in this same context, we're still at the we hope 33 people don't die phase of certainty of outcome. So our house is truly on fire. And I know you heard that yesterday, and you're going to hear it again probably this afternoon. You're probably going to hear it at the next conference. But if you were at the 2016 annual conference, you heard that from my CEO, Brendan Bechtel, in reference to the state of the capital mega projects industry. 98% cost overruns or delays, 80% cost increases, 20-month average slippage in project schedule. If we want to continue to build capital projects, we've got to approach improving productivity differently than we are now. Hoping for productivity to improve is not a strategy. It's going to take the corporate leadership of both the owners and the contractors together to develop and implement corporate-led productivity programs. The same leadership that developed, drove, and implemented the Zero Accident Safety Program. So our call to action, you've already heard it, read the RT 340 paper. This is available to you now, available to you today. Assess your program, your current program. Identify the strengths and weaknesses within your program. Most importantly, identify the barriers that are going to have to be removed to be able to implement an effective program. Understand the components of an effective productivity program, and then implement your plan. With that, thank you for your attention. RT 340 is now available for any questions you might have.
Okay, so we received probably close to 30 questions, and I'm grouping them and kind of try to cover most of them. So there are several questions related to implementation. One of them, or like combining a couple of them, we talk about more than 90 actions. So which actions are the most important, and where should you start, or where should my company start?
I'll take that.
Okay.
You know, there's a real desire to oversimplify things, and we've heard, you know, through the course of this conference, there's 200 of this, 100 of that. We propose 94, so we're under 100. So that's good news for this project, but there is no silver bullet. And your individual context within your organization is going to drive that. You can't pass the assess phase to understand where your weaknesses are, where your barriers are, and to be able to say, okay, if we just take these top 10, we got them covered. You really need to understand your current state. As the great systems thinking quote says, there is no problem or solution that's valid free of its context. So this whole thing is context driven, and you have to put in the hard work to understand what actions are most important to you.
Okay. I'll just add to that, the assessment, which we talk about at the starting point, is an assessment at the corporate level. And what it means is that it's something that you're going to do maybe once a year or once every 2 years, but it's really comprehensive. You have to engage a lot of individuals, like from top down, across business units, across projects, to really have a clear picture of what's going on in the organization, so that you can try to fix the problem. And with that in mind, when we did the assessments as part of the research, when we did the case study, we found out that the reality of the companies is completely different, the strengths and the weakness. So you cannot really say, okay, you need to focus on this 3 because it's going to work for everyone. No. Each company is unique. The goals that each company has in terms of productivity are different. And because of that, yeah, you can say now, do that. You have to look at the whole picture. And the assessment that's described in the implementation framework help with that. And then we can discuss more details of that later. Okay, there was a question here. Let me see. Okay, so it's more the big picture one. So what are the main challenges that companies are facing to obtain the corporate engagement and commitment that is required for the success of productivity programs?
I can start answering that question. One of our challenges, our company has been on this journey for a little over 3 years now, so it is a journey. And each challenge each year is different. So I think our current challenge now that we have everybody at least thinking of this and have the awareness, and now that I've been participating on this research team in the last 2 years, I think our main challenge right now is getting everybody to look at their metrics and to measure productivity in some type of standard way, so that across the company, when we say, have we gotten better or worse, we have at least 1 or 2, maybe even 3 common metrics that we can say, as a company, we're getting better. Right now, things are siloed, and we want to get out of the silo, because productivity goes across the organization and not just within one business unit or one organization within a company. So I think the main challenge for us right now is to get everybody looking at productivity the same way.
I'd pile on with Angela's statement. Our senior leadership tends to have a different perception of how productive our projects really are, but they use limited metrics to determine that. Once you use the right metrics and the right combination of metrics to make them understand that productivity is not exactly where they think it is, that helps break down some of those barriers that they have on implementing corporate-wide productivity initiatives.
Okay. Yeah, just also want to add to that, because there are some questions around metrics, and Juan mentioned that. There's always the talk about how we need to define a common productivity metrics across the industry, like safety has. And this proven to be a big challenge, and several studies tried to do that, and so far, no one was successful. So what we learned in our efforts when we look at the different companies, that, well, you need to define a productivity metric for your company, right? Even if it's different from another, right? If you just wait to have this industry level productivity metric, things are not gonna move forward. So the starting point is at least you define internally so that you have parameters to improve. And maybe in the future, as an industry and working with CI and other organizations, we can move towards having this more industry level reference. But what we learn again, and the reason why the metrics are different, that the goals, when we look at what companies were looking for, when you look at owners and contractors, even when you think about productivity goals and metrics, they were different. That's why some of the initial actions that Angela described under the leadership category were, okay, you have to define your productivity goals, your productivity metrics, what's important for you, what's important for your clients. And then at that point you can improve. Another question. So how do you best align owner and contractor to achieve and benefit from productivity best practices and productivity improvement?
You want to take that?
Well, I can start by answering. One of the things that our company did, we had a summit. We invited our top 35 contractors to our headquarters to talk to us about continuous improvement, productivity, and just, our whole supply chain efforts. And that started the conversation with us. So when we went out to start talking to them about being more productive, they heard it from our senior leadership first. They did not just hear it from myself or my team members going out to watch them do work to see, basically what the processes were. But we had a summit, we invited them down. So it basically takes our senior leaders developing a partnership, having some type of, I call it a summit, but a meeting where we sit in a room for a couple hours and start to discuss, as a construction industry, why is it that our productivity is stagnant? How can we get better? What do we need to do to get better collectively as an industry and as a supply chain going across from company to vendor or contractor? It's not just the organization. I mean, we're partners. So we started out by having some type of summit.
I think the good news is that owners are now involved with productivity down to the activity level. They're concerned about how much time is being spent on actual physical work at the projects. So they are looking at those common tools that we normally use. So we are able to now compare some of the data that we have, that we collect as contractors, compare that to what the data that the owners are collecting, so that we have a common understanding of where we need to improve, where the contractor is causing the productivity problem, or where the owner is causing the productivity program. And a lot of that comes back to CII and the best practices that CII offers, because using the CII best practices, you're now talking apples and apples.
Yeah, and so to build on Doug's point, the barriers don't discriminate. The barriers that you identify will both identify the contractor and the owner, and collectively what you need to do to overcome.
Yeah. And if I could add something, I think it's very important to emphasize the partnership that needs to take place every time there's a project, right? There's a lot of times that organizations will have robust tools and a lot of matrices, but then the client wants to look at it differently. And unfortunately, sometimes we get into the tools not being nimble enough, right? And there's a lot of spinning our wheels in the mud, trying to get data in and out and up and downstream, and that creates confusion. It creates misalignment. So there's got to be an alignment at all levels and a handshake, so to speak, as how that project is going to be managed. In addition to the matrices, what we're pointing out is that it's kind of what Carlos was saying, the measures and matrices, they're important. We're asking to think about it on the umbrella side, right? Maybe develop a KPI about, are you reviewing productivity on the project every week? Maybe that should be a matrix versus what is a productivity number, right? Are you, just like we do safety, right? Are safety meetings taking place? What is our percent of gang box stocks and so forth? So maybe those are some of the matrices you got to develop with your owner and your client so that you guys can understand the management of that, and it helps you on your program success.
Okay, so it seems like we are running out of time. I just want to add a few things. So when the team developed this list of actions and the implementation framework, when you look at the actions more closely, you quickly find out that those actions, they apply to owners and contractors, and no matter if you're a big or a small, because those are things that needs to be accomplished at the corporate level to achieve the successful implementation of the productivity practice. So please have a chance to take a look. So our team now, it's going to be at meet the VIP booth in the room next door. If you have any other questions, feel free to stop by, and then meet not only us, but the other members of the research team. So we had a pretty active group of 18 individuals representing many different companies that really put a lot of effort over these 2 years to do this project. So thank you.